Welcome back to Court TV. I'm Ted Rollins. We're covering the capital murder case of Florida versus Grant Amato. After deliberating for 8 hours, the jury found Amato guilty of killing both his parents and his brother, all because they tried to get in his way of his obsession with a webcam girl that he connected with online. Amato believed he was in a relationship with a woman named Sylvia, who he met on a porn website, even though he had never met her in person. Now that same jury that convicted him will have to decide whether to recommend a sentence of life in prison without parole or the death penalty. The penalty phase begins August 12th in this trial. Holly Waltman is a criminal defense attorney. She's been with us all afternoon. And Holly, if you're representing Grant Amato going into this phase, obviously your goal is to save his life. What is the most compelling thing you can bring to the table here? Is it that you factor this porn addiction into a disease to where it turn him into another person, or are you looking more at this is a guy, he's an RN, he's a life worth keeping, he's a good person? How do you attack it?
Well, I think you can do both of those things. I think that it would be very advantageous for the defense counsel to have picked out maybe one or two jurors that he was connecting with during the first part of this trial.
That I don't know would have been so easy, given Grant Amato's demeanor. I was there during jury selection. I mean, talk about a robot. This guy's just straight ahead, and it's hard. You know, it's always hard to connect, like figure if you do have a connection with a juror. But to your point, there were questions in voir dire that could lead you that way.
Certainly, and also I would use his stoic face and the absence of emotions during the trial part of it to lean into the fact that someone who can do that and pull that off has to be sick. And do we as a country and do we as citizens of this county want to put someone to death that is that sick?
How do you get over the fact that this isn't a common sickness, if you will? If it was a drug addict or someone who was addicted to, liquor or booze or, pain meds, something like that, you oh, my brother or my uncle, you have some sort of reference point. This is so out of left field. I mean, this guy was in love with a cam girl and blew $20,000 or $200,000 on her and ends up killing his family because of her. How do you get around that? I guess you bring in a professional.
Well, I do think that this is a type of addiction that we don't talk about as a society the same way and with the same amount of emphasis as we do other mental illnesses. But porn sites are more popular and are watched more than Amazon and Google, Facebook and Instagram combined. So I do think that this is more common than we discuss as a society.
But was this a porn addiction, or was this love? Like a love addiction that he was addicted to this person, because he's spending hours and hours online.
This is
watching porn.
It's certainly a delusional.
And it's not different girls. It's this one.
Right. It's one girl. This is where you lean on experts, and you really spend a lot of your resources as a defense team. And in this case, I'm sure they had to ask the court for those resources to get an expert in and try and explain this to people that maybe haven't been exposed to family members with similar issues.
Do you think a male or a female juror is more likely to see the goodness in a porn-addicted Grant Amato?
We don't have to. I don't think we have to find goodness in Grant Amato. We have to find humanism, and I think that women stereotypically tend to be a little more emotional as jurors, and so I think that you would try and connect, or at least I would try to connect with a female juror.
During the prosecution's rebuttal argument, Dominic Leo stressed to the jury that any doubt that the defense tried to show was manufactured. He asked the jury to render a verdict of justice. Take a listen.
Doesn't know what he heard. That's my recollection of his testimony. He was all over the place. Could have been gunshots, could have been this, could have been that. I hear him all the time, who knows? And regardless, that was at 9 o'clock in the morning. Medical examiner. No bias, it's true. Also had no idea what was going on at the house, because she wasn't there. She didn't process the body, she didn't bag it up, that wasn't her. No clue. No bias, sure, no clue. To insinuate that she knew that the ID was fingerprint scanning is another mischaracterization and misstatement of the evidence. But don't take my word for it. Check your notes. No, this is a good one. The medical examiner testified, this is Mr. Dowdy's argument, testified that there's a laceration on the top of the finger. Laceration on the top of the finger, the index finger. Great. Where are your fingerprints? On the top of your finger or on the bottom of your finger? Who cares about the cut on the top of your finger? Again, manufactured doubt. GSR on the gloves. There's no evidence that those gloves were anywhere than where they were found, inside Grant's bag. Now, I want to discuss a few things with you. As Mr. Dowdy brought up, getting an instruction about weighing the evidence. And I won't belabor the point. But here's the instruction. It is up to you to decide what evidence is reliable. Please, you should use your common sense, not my words, in evaluating and deciding what the best evidence is and which evidence should not be relied upon in deciding your verdict. Some of the evidence you can find reliable, some not reliable. You can believe part of testimony, not part of some other testimony. Okay? These are the things you consider when you're weighing testimony and evidence. Did the witness seem to have an opportunity to see to see and know the things about which the witness testified? Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the questions? Did the witness have any interest in how the case should be decided? Number 5 is important. They're all important. Does the witness's testimony agree with the other testimony and the other evidence in the case? Did the witness at some time make a statement that's inconsistent with the testimony he or she gave in court? That's the law that you are to apply. And so when you go back and you go down the list of witnesses that testified in this case, you do that. I want to point out a couple more things about Mr. Amato's story not adding up. These are these notes that were found. They're in evidence. The notes that were found. There was one note that was found in the hotel room, and there was the one note that was found in the car. Interestingly enough, there were no notes that were found in the house, but apparently Mr. Amato's become quite the diary writer. So let's begin with the one found at the hotel. I miss being home already, and it's only been 1 day since I was kicked out by Dad. Cody said he'd take care of it, but there is nothing he can do about this. I miss the house, and the comfort and the atmosphere had been getting worse and worse. Cody sounded pretty sad, suicide. And I told him that it's over at the house. We had a good 29 years, and I wish it could work out. Looks like I have to finally live on my own. This part's laughable. Sadly, Cody is still helping me by giving me his debit until I can get settled. Oh, and the interview went well today. And no phone service because Dad canceled it. So here we have laying out a suicide, laying out why he has Cody's debit card. I guess he forgot he stole his credit card too. I went to an interview, so I couldn't have been there when it happened. And you can't track me because my phone doesn't work. Now we talk about the suicide note that was in his car that he couldn't drop off. Brother, and remember, this is interesting too. It's written in different person, first person, third person. Brother, they just told me what happened. Dad told you to pack and get out of the house because you were caught texting that woman again. Grant, I'll take care of all your problems. I just need you back. I can't live without you, brother. I said I'd take care of all your problems at the house, and I have. No one will ever bother you again regarding this. Please come home. Can't do this again. I'm part of the problem, and I've really lost you. And I can't take that loss after everything. There is nothing I can say to change your mind. I love you, 022, and I wish you felt the same. It's going to come home after you. It's going to come after you again. So what's the point? The defendant wrote this. If you believe that he wrote this to memorialize a conversation he had with his brother, that belief is not reasonable. That belief isn't even forced. I don't know that you can even imagine that. This was the note that never got dropped off at the house because he couldn't finish his play. I implore you, please, to review the evidence, review your notes. Look at every single thing. It's like over 300 pieces of evidence in this case. Look at all of it. I want you to. We want you to. To infer that we have manufactured or created a case is discouraging. It's not our job. Put the police on trial for their investigation of a triple homicide. It's fine to a certain extent. Should hold the police accountable. That's what makes America America. But don't fall into the trap that there's some conspiracy, that everybody's a liar and everybody's incompetent, because there's no evidence to support that. And your verdict has to be based only on the evidence. Thank you.
All right, Holly Waltman is still with us, and the prosecution did a great job, I think, of really laying it out and getting that common sense theme into, well, who else would have done this? And really, the defense came out and said, we're not even gonna go there. We're not gonna tell you that we think it's some group that wanted their marijuana or that we thought it's the Bulgarian mafia coming. They said, there just wasn't enough evidence. And one of the things they pointed out too was the fact that there was no blood found on Grant Amato, on his clothing, in his car that, they say he left in his car, nothing. And given the fact that there were 3 dead bodies, all suffered gunshot wounds, there was blood all over the house, was that, first of all, surprising to you that there wasn't that blood evidence? And then also, should the defense have hammered harder on that in the close?
Well, certainly, I think it was shocking. Anyone who has seen these photos of the crime scene would have, found it hard to believe that someone could have been in that same house and not gotten any blood on any part of their body or their car. The state had a really logical storyline here, and it was backed by technology. It was backed by a lot of these apps and the money, and they had a lot of things that helped paint their picture. Certainly, the defense could have hammered that more. Would it have changed the outcome? I'm not sure. I think that a really good defense tactic could have been, hey, this could have happened and the state can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, and our system still allows you to find someone not guilty who may have committed these things but just not been proven to have done it the way that they said.
Right, which is sort of the way they went about it, but they didn't come out and say it. That, coming out and saying, hey, you may have real feelings that he did it, but that doesn't matter, because if you don't think they've proven this case, you can't find him guilty. The blood, one of the state argued, well, that he had plenty of time, hours in that house, and he didn't seem to mind being around his dead parents and dead brother because he was using, apparently, his father's finger to access his iPhone. So their argument is he cleaned it up, but there was no evidence of a cleanup. Isn't there usually evidence of someone cleaning up?
I think that the pictures would have definitely, considering the amount of blood we had at the crime scene, you definitely would have seen an attempt to clean it up. But if it didn't happen at the house, if the cleanup happened somewhere else, maybe outside of Publix, maybe, if this was actually premeditated, who's not to say that he didn't have some ammonia or some hydrogen peroxide and toss that all out with the murder weapon?
And that he cleaned up himself and he cleaned up his car, the things that he would have touched after leaving the house. But there were no footprints either. It just seems as though there wasn't a lot. Let's move forward to now the next phase. We were talking about it earlier, the capital murder case. When you're a juror in a situation where you got through the guilt phase, but maybe you had some reservations, and there was an 8-hour deliberation period in this case. Do you think that the 8 hours, first of all, do you think that helps him? Do you think that means that there was some reasonable doubt, that there was some discussion about the evidence, and it wasn't just going through what do we think of witnesses? Does that, because it seems like that's a pretty long period of time. Do you think that bodes well for Grant Amato moving forward?
Certainly, I do. If this would have been a slam dunk and they would have walked in and said, yes, we all are on the same page, it would have taken 20 minutes to fill out the verdict form. I think that bodes well. And even though these people are death penalty qualified as jurors, and they stood up in a courtroom full of 50 people and defense attorneys, prosecutors, and looked the judge in the eye and said, I can follow the law, and in an appropriate situation, I could even vote for death. Saying that and then actually doing it is two different things.
How do you get to them then as the prosecution? How do you get them to do their legal duty? And if the evidence is there, you should. The state of Florida has the death penalty, and this is a case that deserves it. What would you do if you're the prosecution first, and then we'll talk defense?
If I was a prosecutor, I would empower them. I would make sure that they realized that they were left on this jury for a reason, and they were selected for a purpose, and I would empower them to do what the law allows them to do and just not make it a personal choice, but rather more of a mechanical situation of this is what your duty is as a jury.
Defense, how do you get to them and say, oh, come on. I mean, I know what he did was crazy. Don't kill him.
That's exactly how I'd go at it. What happened was crazy, and what it is only done by someone who is crazy. And we don't put people to death that are crazy or that have mental illness or are sick in the mind. And so you lean into the fact that who in their right mind could possibly kill their mother, the person that brought them into this earth, their father and their beloved brother. You have to be sick to do something like that, and we can't put someone to death who is sick.
Do you think that his brother, Jason Amato, will be pivotal in all of this?
Absolutely. He was on both the defense and the state's witness list. We heard from him twice. It will be very telling who he testifies for or what is in his victim statement. I do think that this jury will feel very convicted to follow what it is he asked them to do.
The fact that Florida changed the rules, it used to be that you just had to have a majority, or I think it was 75% or something. It wasn't full agreement. Now it has to be unanimous, and one juror can hang out and say no, and really doesn't have to explain his or herself. They just have to have a feeling, and that can be a mitigating circumstance. Can just be that I like the way he looked, or whatever it is to that jury, and that's the new law in the state of Florida. It makes it very difficult to impose the death penalty. Do you think that the odds are that he's going to be given everything, it'll be life, or do you think there will be a good chance of death?
Well, it is the highest thing that we're asking someone to do, take someone else's life because of something they did. So I do believe that it should be a unanimous decision. I think personally that life in prison without the possibility of parole is a much harsher sentence.
Why?
Because every single day, I mean, death, even though there is a long time to wait for a death row execution, you know that there's some finality. He doesn't, Mr. Amato doesn't know how long he's going to live, and without the possibility of ever being considered for parole, he wakes up every day.
But isn't that looking forward to that potential death sentence, isn't that part of the death sentence, the anxiety that's created by that? Like, oh, I don't know how much I have before the state, calls my name. Where the other guy can, I'm working in the library, or, they create a new life.
I think for a reasonable person with a logical mind, certainly the idea of one day I'm going to be called for the last time and go down that hallway for the last time while the state of Florida puts me to death is something that is a fear and an anxiety for someone who's reasonable and logical. But I'm not sure that this person is that.
Right. All right. Holly Waltman, thanks for hanging out with me today. Appreciate it. We're going to take a short break. We'll have more coverage of Florida versus Grant Amato next. Stay with us.